Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's GBI show. That's Gridiron Betting Insights right here on QL TV. I'm Jay Sanin, and tonight we take you through the NFC South. We preview the entire division heading into the 2020 NFL season. We let you know what the odds are in the futures market, some that we have our eye on here at QL TV as well, some things you might want to consider getting a ticket in on before the season begins. Now, before we get to all that, you'll notice tonight a little bit of housekeeping first. We're going to keep the low grade comedy to a minimum tonight in light of what's going on around the country. Obviously, the situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the aftermath has left tremors reverberating throughout the world of sports. It has made its way to the NFL as well, with some practices being canceled. And in light of that, making bad jokes does not sound like something that is in good taste tonight. So you might notice a little drier version of the program tonight. And just know that was done consciously. So we'll get into the NFC South this evening, and we'll start, as we do with all of these division previews, with the key storylines in each division heading into the season. And we will start, as we always do, with the defending champions of the division. And in the NFC South, that, of course, is the New Orleans Saints. They had an excellent season last year, but could not cash in the playoffs in what was really their third consecutive year of heartbreaking, soul-crushing defeat in the NFC playoffs. Of course, you had the Minneapolis Miracle a few seasons ago with Stephon Diggs and the inexplicable defending done by the Saints secondary at the end of that game. Then, of course, 2 years ago, you had the egregious no call where Nickel Roby-Coleman commits pass interference for the Rams in the NFC Championship game. No flag, no whistle, no nothing. Rams go on to lose that game in overtime. And then, of course, last year you had the not so much heartbreaking but disappointing loss to the Minnesota Vikings, where the Saints, they have to make a furious comeback in the second half just to bring the game to overtime. They lose by a touchdown in overtime. Drew Brees never touches the ball as Kyle Rudolph makes that touchdown catch, which, again, may or may not have been offensive pass interference. No review took place. And, of course, the Saints go down in the postseason in painful fashion for the third consecutive year. So the question now for the Saints is, can they get over the hump in the NFC and get back to the Super Bowl for the first time in what's now over a decade for that New Orleans Saints franchise? This is a Saints team. They were excellent last year. There's no way around that. Top five in the league in point differential last season. But now you have to wonder, Drew Brees, he's getting older. And as a result of that, they have brought in what appears to be the heir apparent to the quarterback throne there in New Orleans, not Taysom Hill, although he is still around. Jameis Winston comes over from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and appears to be the backup quarterback there in New Orleans. So what is that dynamic going to be like? Obviously, we saw Drew Brees get hurt last season. How does that affect the decision to bring in Winston? Will we actually see him on the field this year as a result of some perhaps fragility from Drew Brees as the season goes along? And this is a Saints team, by the way, who appears to fully be in win now mode. We saw them bring in Emmanuel Sanders in the offseason to help Drew Brees in that passing game. Obviously, you have the best receiver in the game in Mike Thomas, arguably. So that's quite the receiving core. You still have Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray, a nice 1-2 punch in the running game. The offense looking great. And the defense has seen some upgrades as well this offseason. Janoris Jenkins, former Giant, he's now in that defensive backfield for the Saints. Malcolm Jenkins joins it as well. So this is a team that appears to have tried to address their weaknesses very effectively in the offseason. Obviously, doesn't mean anything if it doesn't translate on the field. We will see if that takes place here in 2020. Now, the team that has received the most buzz in the division is a team that did not win it last year. Is not the Saints. In fact, it is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as Tom Brady coined them after agreeing to join up with them in the offseason. Tom Brady leaving the New England Patriots, leaving the nest of Bill Belichick to join the Tampa Bay Bucks, Bruce Arians, and an offense that put up a ton of yards last year. Jameis Winston is the quarterback that threw for 5,000 yards last year. He also threw for 30 interceptions, and they were behind in a lot of their games. Can they be better this year with Brady at the helm? That remains to be seen, but we know that Brady has a lot of new pieces around him, not only the players that were already in Tampa Bay, Mike Evans, Godwin, the tight end group you have there, but they brought in Rob Gronkowski, they brought in LaShawn McCoy, and Ndamukong Suh joins the defense in Tampa Bay. So a lot of moving parts in this division, especially with the teams that are at least thought to be the top two teams in this division heading into the season. But while all the attention is on Tom Brady, all the attention is on the offense there in Tampa Bay, the big question right now is going to be the defense for that Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. They gave up 449 points last year. There were three teams in the league who were worse in that department. You had the Miami Dolphins, who were openly tanking for Tua, and they got him. You had the New York Giants, who, while not openly tanking, might as well have been. And you had the Carolina Panthers, who had the Cam Newton injury. Kyle Allen was out there for a lot of the season. The defense was backed up against the wall for the majority of the year because the offense was so poor in Carolina. So can the defense get better? Can Tom Brady and the offense help them get better? Obviously, you wipe some of the points from the pick sixes from Jameis Winston off the board. That should help. But will the defense be good enough? And will Tom Brady be good enough? Because he did look a little washed last year. We'll get to Tom Brady later in the show in a segment we play every Thursday called Trust Me, Don't Trust Me. Now, third place in the division last year was the Atlanta Falcons, or at least tied for second, 7-9, along with the Bucs. I think they might have had a tiebreaker. Regardless, the team with the third most interest heading into the season would appear to be the Atlanta Falcons anyway. And the big question for the Falcons heading into 2020 is, are there going to be massive changes in that organization at the end of this year? Can they avoid those by performing well enough this season? Dan Quinn, he got the team to a Super Bowl. They blew a 28-3 lead in that Super Bowl, and they have not been heard from again, at least as far as being a legitimate contender for a championship, despite the fact that you have a solid quarterback in Matt Ryan, has his ups and downs, but for the most part, you know what you're going to get from a guy like Matt Ryan. Usually a solid B+ player at quarterback for the Falcons, throwing to a loaded receiving core, Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley headlining that. But everything around those three players has been so disorganized, at least from a player personnel standpoint, that you wonder if this might be it for Quinn. This might be it for GM Thomas Dimitroff. That might be it for both of them after this season, depending on how things go. But that does not mean that the Falcons haven't taken some swings this year. And their biggest swing was bringing in Todd Gurley after he was let go by the LA Rams. The question, of course, with Gurley, what's that knee like? Is he going to be okay? I have a feeling Trust Me, Don't Trust Me will shed more light on that as well. But Dante Fowler also coming over for the Rams is a bit of a splashy signing for Atlanta because he was a solid pass rusher both in Jacksonville and LA to start his career. And this is a team in Atlanta that hasn't always been reliable on defense. They've had those explosive weapons on offense, but when you're giving up points on the back end, it doesn't always matter. So can Fowler help them plug up that defense? Can Gurley shore up that running game so that Matt Ryan and the offense can be as effective as possible? It's also a Falcons team, by the way. They did win their last, 4 games of the season. So they did play well ending the 2019 season. The question is, can they build on that and become better in 2020? And of course, the final team in the NFC South, and really in my opinion, possibly the most interesting one coming into the 2020 season, that's the Carolina Panthers. Because you talk about the moving parts at the top of the division, well, at the bottom of the division, there were a lot as well. Because you look at this team now compared to what it was a year ago. You had Cam Newton at quarterback. You had Ron Rivera coaching the team. Not the case anymore on either end. You have Matt Rule coming over from the college game. He had recently coached at Baylor. He was at Temple before that. He's impressed everywhere he's gone, and he was really kind of the hot coaching hire in this offseason. A lot of teams were talking to Matt Rule, but he's not coached, at least as a head coach, in the pros before. What's that going to be like? And can Joe Brady, the new offensive coordinator who came over from LSU, made Joe Burrow into a star this year? Joe Burrow was decidedly not a star 2 seasons ago. Brady comes in, makes him into a Heisman winner, a national champion caliber quarterback. Can that translate to the pros? And of course, if that's going to happen, they're going to do it with a new quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater comes from New Orleans within the division and is now going to be the starting quarterback in Carolina. He's joined by Robbie Anderson, who joins a solid receiving corps. Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore headlining that group. And of course, he's got Run CMC, Christian McCaffrey in his corner as well on that offense. This is a team, they lost their last 8 games of the 2019 season. The Cam Newton injury weighing heavily into that. Obviously, Kyle Allen played the remainder of the season and was not good for that Carolina team. So can all of these changes, can they get it together in time to be a solid team in a very competitive division is going to be the question. Now, we've done this every week as well, twice a week here on the GBI show. We've looked at the COVID-19 opt-outs for each team because there have been some key pieces in other divisions that have not signed on to this season due to concerns for with COVID, whether it be they thought they were at high risk to catch the infection, they thought that they would rather just play it safe. Either way, no notable COVID-19 opt-outs in this division. And that is a great sign for a lot of teams that have made a lot of changes heading into this year and a couple of Super Bowl contenders as well. No key pieces worth keeping in mind, especially early in the season when you're betting on these games, because continuity from the year before, I think, is going to be very important when you don't have a preseason. Obviously, practice time in the NFL is limited compared to what it used to be. So a lot of teams are really going to be going out there putting a finished product on the field for the first time. And in a division with so many changes as it is, more changes in the form of opt-outs would have really hurt some of these teams. Fortunately, not the case. Now, let's take a look at the odds to win the NFC South. And we will start with the favorites, the New Orleans Saints. They come into the season at minus 130, followed pretty closely by the Bucs at plus 150. Atlanta 8-1 behind them. Carolina all the way back at 22-1. They're expecting some growing pains in Carolina, are the odds makers heading into this season. Now, to win the NFC as a whole, New Orleans plus 550, Tampa Bay generating all that hype after the Brady signing and the thought of what is Brady going to look like with Gronkowski and Mike Evans and Godwin and Brate and Howard and LaShawn McCoy and Ronald Jones, who I've got something for later in the show as well. My goodness. But again, all that hype has led to them kind of getting some steam here in the futures market as one of the teams considered to be a contender heading into the year. They're at 7.5-1 to win the conference. Atlanta behind them 25-1. Carolina all the way back at 60-1. And finally, the odds to win the Super Bowl, not the NFC South like it's written here. Terrible production. I'm the producer. It's my fault. The New Orleans Saints come in at 11-1 to win the Super Bowl this year. Tampa Bay 14-1. Atlanta at 50-1 and 125-1 for the Carolina Panthers. Now, we'll look at the week 1 lines heading into the start of the NFL season involving NFC South teams. And we will start with the Carolina Panthers, who are a 1.5-point home underdog to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Raiders are a team we talked about at the beginning of the GBI show experience a couple of weeks ago, a team that kind of has a hot seat situation at quarterback with Derek Carr, but he hasn't proven that he can be a top-level quarterback in this league. So you got a home dog here, team traveling across the country from Vegas to play an East Coast team, possibly some value there with a Carolina team that is in decent hands, at least on the field. We'll see how the coaching plays out. But Teddy Bridgewater is a player who, he's not going to go out there and make a ton of mistakes. If anything, you're getting that game manager type quarterback. And I don't hate having them as an underdog there. maybe you play the money line instead of taking the 1.5. But either way, I don't hate the look there one bit. The Atlanta Falcons, also a home dog in week one. They are a 1 point home dog against the Seattle Seahawks, a team that I could easily see winning the Super Bowl this year or the NFC if they don't win against the AFC in the Super Bowl. They're a team that I'm pretty high on this season. And with, quarterback mismatch there, Russell Wilson just playing at one of the highest levels we've seen this quarterback position be played at in this league against a guy in Matt Ryan who, again, solid, not great. I would lean toward the road team there if I'm laying only a point. And then finally, as a division matchup, you have Tampa Bay plus 3.5 on the road against the New Orleans Saints. And this is a game that I don't know I want any part of, only because we don't know what this Tampa Bay offense is going to look like. We don't know what Bruce Arians and Tom Brady are going to do together. We don't know if Tom Brady can still throw a football at this point in his career. We know that the Saints are a strong team, but they tend to play down to competition at times or just have weird outcomes. I mean, you saw the game against the Texans last year. Pretty quiet game most of the game. That both teams just start pinging the ball up and down the field. They end up winning it on a made field goal as time expired. Obviously, all playoff craziness with that team. I don't know that I want any part of that game, especially a division matchup this early in the season. But that's going to be a great one. That's one of the 425 nationally televised games, and certainly excited about that. Of course, your week one betting lines for the start of the NFL season, you can find those at betql.co. Go to betql.co. They have that kind of data, but they also have a lot of interesting stuff on line movements, where sharp money is versus where the public is on games, as well as just some fascinating stuff on projecting the outcomes so you can see what the projections look like versus what the point spread is, help you find market inefficiencies when betting these NFL games. Use betql.co, promo code SANIN, that's SANIN, for 20% off all subscriptions, everything from a weekly subscription to an annual package and everything in between for all your NFL betting needs. That's betql.co, promo code SANIN. Now, we'll move to our weekly installment of Trust Me, Don't Trust Me. And it was hard to pick just a few players in this division because not only do you have some of the more interesting moves in the offseason, but you also have some players coming back from injury, some players that are trying to reestablish themselves as greats in the game. But we managed to narrow it down to 5. We got 5 players in this week's edition of Trust Me, Don't Trust Me. And we will start with a player that many think is the greatest of all time in the NFL. That would be Tom Brady. And I am here to say I do not trust him heading into the 2020 season. I believe Brady is washed up at this point in his career. If we were doing the NFC South on a Tuesday, that would have been the subject of my sorry if this offends rant of the week. Instead, I'm just going to say it here on Trust Me, Don't Trust Me. I think Tom Brady is washed. Tom Brady averaged 6.6 yards per pass attempt last season. And of course, we use yards per attempt. We use yards per play when betting on the NFL because that tells you a better story than per game and per drive numbers, where things can get skewed by garbage time, things can get skewed by blowouts, and just a general team philosophy. Whereas the per play and per attempt numbers, they tell you, okay, every time Tom Brady was asked to throw the ball, this is how he performed. It's a much more instructive, much more insightful way to look at these numbers. And Tom Brady's 6.6 yards per pass attempt left him tied with 3 quarterbacks. And when people usually think of quarterbacks on the same level as Tom Brady, they usually think of Joe Montana and Peyton Manning. Well, you know who he was tied with last year in yards per attempt? Daniel Jones, Jacoby Brissett, and Andy Dalton, who, of course, run out of Cincinnati this year and has been replaced by Joe Burrow, and last year was replaced by Jeff Driscoll, who is a real guy, in case you were wondering. His yards per pass attempt were worse than that of Kyle Allen of the Carolina Panthers last year. And you can blame it on the receiving core and the injuries, but he was being coached by the greatest coach in the history of coaching, Bill Belichick. And there were times where Brady was just missing on short throws. It wasn't like he was throwing deep and they just weren't landing. He was missing on short throws, even in the postseason last year. He did not look like the same quarterback. And for that reason, I don't trust him here, where he has to A, learn a new offense for the first time since I was a child, and B, has to get used to working with a new group of players and some players that frankly are past their prime on this Tampa Bay offense. I just don't see it working out quite as well as a lot of people do. And that's why I don't trust Tom Brady. We'll move to another quarterback here in this division, Teddy Bridgewater of the Carolina Panthers. And Teddy Bridgewater is someone I trust heading into the season. You're never going to get a Patrick Mahomes like season out of Teddy Bridgewater. But in 9 games last year for the Saints, while Drew Brees was nursing his hand injury, he completed 68% of his passes. Very impressive. 9 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the year. Now, you'd love to see that touchdown number go up, obviously, and I think it will. And I'll tell you why. I think the Saints were a little risk averse with Teddy Bridgewater last year. The whole goal was, listen, let's go out there. We're one of the best teams in the league. Let's not make mistakes. We'll play a little conservatively on offense. And I think that's why you didn't see quite the explosive touchdown interception numbers. But he limited the turnovers. And in a new offense with an entirely new coaching staff there in Carolina, I think that's going to be the most important thing. You have a defensive head coach in Matt Rule, who I think will make that defense better. And he is now working with one of the great offensive minds in the game in Joe Brady. I think that works out very well in Carolina for everybody involved. I don't know that they're a playoff team, but I do know that's a team that plays better than it did last year. And for that reason, I trust Teddy Bridgewater. Now, Todd Gurley will be our first skill position player of this week's NFC South edition of Trust Me, Don't Trust Me. And I do not trust Todd Gurley heading into 2020. I think the change of scenery to Atlanta is a great thing for him because it had run its course in Los Angeles. But I think there's also a reason that it ran its course in Los Angeles, and that is the fact that the knee just wasn't good enough to hold up. There's a reason Sean McVay did not give him too many touches in the playoff run to the Super Bowl, and even last year. There's a reason for it. He's not as able to change directions. He's not as elusive as he was, and he's not as explosive because of the knee problems. And in a position like running back in the NFL, if your knees do not allow you to do those things, you are not long for this league. This could be it for Todd Gurley in the NFL as a whole. I don't see it working out as well as what they had in the backfield last year with, Devontae Freeman and, even, some of the lower tier guys. Goodness, I think Ito Smith is going to get the ball a good deal for the Falcons heading into this year just because he's healthier and younger than Todd Gurley. And Todd Gurley is somebody who I don't trust to remain at a high enough level physically to deliver for the Falcons in 2020. Another running back who's had some physical issues and is changing teams to an NFC South squad is LaShawn McCoy. And I don't trust him either. I don't trust Ronald Jones for that matter, who, by the way, amassed a less than impressive 724 yards in 16 games last season. So I get why the Bucs made the move to LaShawn McCoy, because Ronald Jones, who's still going to figure into this backfield equation, he just wasn't good enough. But again, there are reasons why teams let players walk. And this is something that you can certainly take away from the Patriots dynasty, where when Bill Belichick let a player go or traded a player for less than you thought he was worth, there's a reason. It's because these guys, at least for the most part, I'm excluding Giants general manager Dave Gettleman from this, but for the most part, these guys know what they're looking at. They know what these players can do and what they have in the tank for teams. And LaShawn McCoy There's a reason why he's not still with that juggernaut of an offense in Kansas City, because he lacked what they needed to be great. There's a reason that Damian Williams, despite being far less experienced and far less explosive as far as name value is concerned, there's a reason he was the guy at the end of the season for Kansas City as opposed to LaShawn McCoy. There's a reason the Chiefs went with Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the draft instead of keeping LaShawn McCoy around. It's because he's just not good enough anymore. This feels like another scrap heap signing to me that looks good. You know, you can put an image on Twitter of Brady and Gronkowski and McCoy, and that looks really exciting, and people are going to go, wow, that's a dangerous team. But LaShawn McCoy had 5 total touchdowns last year for the Chiefs. And granted, that's because they have 1,000 weapons, but he wasn't, under 5 yards a carry, and just a guy who I just don't think is going to make Tampa Bay the stop where he rejuvenates his career. That's my take on LaShawn McCoy. Finally, another guy trying to recover from injuries and reclaim his career in the NFC South, Rob Gronkowski. And I don't trust Rob Gronkowski either. And we have a question about Rob Gronkowski from Vince. And Vince wants to know, can Gronk stay healthy for the whole year? And the answer to that question is probably not. I mean, the guy hasn't played football in ages now. And to be fair, I guess it depends on how you define healthy, because he might stay on the field for a full year. He stayed on the field for decent chunks of time with the Patriots, but he was always banged up. He always had something going on with his arm or his elbow. Obviously, he had some concussion issues as well. Can he avoid those? I think the answer is no, even if he does stay on the field. And on top of that, I can't see how you justify keeping him on the field all that much. I think he's the third best tight end on that Buccaneers team. I think that if you look at that team, you have Cameron Brate, who another guy who suffers from injury concerns, to be fair, but OJ Howard as well. You have a couple of tight ends who are already better than him at this stage of their careers relative to his. And I just don't think that Rob Gronkowski is going to be a legitimate weapon, at least this season. I mean, who knows? Maybe he works himself back into game shape. Of course, I say that fully knowing that he's in incredible shape, but you can only do so much to, you simply cannot replicate actual NFL game reps. And I think it might take him a season to get back up to speed in that regard. So that's trust me, don't trust me for this week. As usual, I'm a little skeptical of a lot of the talent heading into a division before a season starts, especially in this one, though. So many moving pieces, so many things that can go wrong for a number of teams. And I think, especially with that Tampa Bay team, picking up a lot of players who are nowhere near their primes, I just don't see that working out quite as well as they hope that it does, is my take on that. Now we'll look at the futures market here in the NFC South, and we will start with a couple of picks related to the New Orleans Saints. First, I think they are going to repeat as division champions. That's at minus 130 over at DraftKings Sportsbook as of this afternoon. And I am also thinking a ticket on them to win the Super Bowl at 11-1 is a move worth making. You have a team here, clearly one of the best in the NFL. They have made playoff runs multiple times in recent seasons. So at 11-1, you're asking, can they win a couple more games than they have in previous years? And I think there's a lot of value there at 11-1 based off of that. And again, you look at how they lost those playoff games. It's not just that they lost the games. They lost those playoff games on a couple of once-in-a-lifetime bad breaks. There's no way somebody shouldn't have tackled Stephon Diggs. Everybody knows that. And there's no way that Nickel Roby-Coleman should not have been called for pass interference in the NFC title game. I'm not upset about it, but that's just a fact. So you're asking, can a team win a couple more games than they did in previous seasons? And can they avoid some once-in-a-lifetime bad luck? I think at that number, you got to give it a shot. Elsewhere in the division, I love the Carolina Panthers at over 5.5 wins. Minus 122, a little bit of juice there. But this is a team that won 5 games last year, despite the fact that Kyle Allen started 13 out of their 16. Despite the fact that it was pretty well known for a lot of that season, Ron Rivera was not going to be coming back. You bring in Teddy Bridgewater, again, a steady option at quarterback, and you bring in an offensive coordinator who should improve things on the offensive side of the ball. Also worth noting, should Teddy Bridgewater go down, I mean, you talk about Kyle Allen was the backup last year who got the majority of the action after Cam went down. Well, should Teddy Bridgewater get injured or otherwise taken out of action, you hope not to see that. But should it happen, the Panthers, they come at teams now with the potential to bring PJ Walker in as a backup. Of course, PJ Walker, or MVPJ as he was going by in Houston when he was the quarterback of the Roughnecks of the XFL, he was really the success story of last season's XFL before it went under due to COVID-19. And he is a player who's mobile. He showed explosivity in the passing game. Cam Phillips, his favorite wide receiver from the Roughnecks, also in Carolina. So I think even if things start to go bad for this Panthers team, they are stacked with depth compared to what they had last year, and they finally will have some direction. And to me, 7 wins or more, I think, is very attainable for this Panthers team. Also, regarding Teddy Bridgewater, DraftKings had an interesting prop. And of course, when it comes to the props, you might have to shop around depending on what's available in your market. It varies state to state. Bridgewater to have more passing touchdowns than Cam Newton, minus 134 at DraftKings. Cam Newton, he's been dealing with injury concerns as well. So it's not as if Bridgewater is off the scrap heap and Newton has been fresh as daisy this whole time. Cam Newton, ever since that Super Bowl 50 appearance, has been dealing with injuries, has been dealing with problems with consistency, and we don't even know if he's going to be the guy long term in New England. Whereas Bridgewater at least looks pretty well secured as the starting option right now. I think, he doesn't light it up in terms of touchdowns, but I do think he will pretty comfortably outperform Cam Newton, who has to learn an entirely new offense, an offense that has made it clear that some days they're just going to run the ball 40 times because they can, because Bill Belichick just switches things up on a whim. That's not a team that's going to drop back and pass every down. Whereas Joe Brady, you saw it last year, took a mediocre quarterback and said, we're going to throw the ball 1 billion times. Good luck stopping us. I think that Bridgewater gets the better of Newton for those reasons. And finally, perhaps my hottest take of the day, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers under 9.5 wins on the season. You can get it plus money, barely, plus 103, but plus money. Like I said, I think Tom Brady is not done, but compared to the Tom Brady you used to see, I don't think that guy is ever coming back. And I think that Mike Evans and Godwin and all those tight ends, they're great. But Brady's not a guy who's going to push the ball down the field anymore. And that's where a guy like Mike Evans is at his best. Godwin, he can work 3 levels. Mike Evans, far and away better at catching deep balls than he is, running short routes, which is where Brady's had to look for the bulk of his career with guys like Welker and Edelman in New England. I just don't think it's a great fit. And I think that there are problems around the rest of that roster that still need to be addressed if the Bucs are going to be a playoff contender. They might sneak in now. 7 teams making the playoffs. They might sneak in as a wild card. I just do not see it at double-digit wins for the year. Also worth shopping around for. I found earlier this offseason, felt like ages ago because of everything going on in the world, the Bucs to not win the NFC South. So it was the Bucs against the Field. Field was minus 160, and I thought that was interesting. If you can find something similar at a shop that you use, I would certainly consider that as well. So that's a look at the futures market in the NFC South, and that is everything you need to know heading into the 2020 season about this division. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the GBI show. That's Gridiron Betting Insights with me, Jay Sanin. Next week on Tuesday, we'll have the first of two shows for the week, and we will stay in the South. The AFC South will be the subject this time, and another division with a lot of interesting moving parts. Phillip Rivers joining the Colts, DeAndre Hopkins out in Houston, David Johnson in. Can the Jaguars relearn how to play football just as a whole? And can the Titans build off their season last year that saw them come a game away from a Super Bowl berth? We'll find out together on GBI show with me, Jay Sanin, on Tuesday. Until then, good luck on all your bets, folks. Be safe.